The billionaires really have taken over. No question. You got someone, I don't know how rich Elon Musk is, but north of 100 billion, maybe 200 billion, can do anything he wants and has no interest whatsoever in a free and fair election, only has an interest in tilting the political system to help his own business interests, his own ego.
Professor Lichtman, let me take you back to the run up to the election. So we're looking at Monday. Say, was that a kind of busy day? You're on tenterhooks what the result might be?
I've been doing this for over 40 years. Every 4 years, I have butterflies in my stomach. This year, I had crows in my stomach. And on election night, I did my own live show with my son at Allan Lichtman YouTube. We do it every Thursday and Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. And we were the first to see what was happening, that the
Right.
math was going against Harris and that Donald Trump was going to win the election, contrary to what I had predicted.
So what was the moment on Tuesday where you thought, oh my God, I'm in deep trouble here, and so is Harris?
Pennsylvania. We were looking at Pennsylvania and we saw a lot of the big Democratic areas had already had been underperforming. We did the mathematical calculation and decided Pennsylvania is gone. We had already called Georgia and North Carolina for Trump, and we saw no path for Harris to win the election. So we were able to call it long before anyone else, the networks, the Associated Press, the cable outlets. We owned up to what was happening because, we objectively analyzed what was going on.
And so I'll come back to your original prediction in a minute, but at that point, did you sort of fess up and say, mea culpa, I've got this wrong and it's very embarrassing?
Absolutely. You know, maybe not at that very moment,
Mm.
but right that morning, I issued a statement which was widely reported in the press saying, I am taking this day off. That was a Wednesday to assess why I was wrong and the implications of this election for the future of American democracy. So I owned up
Yeah.
right away to the fact that this was one of my very rare misses in a prediction. And I did think pretty hard about why I missed and what that means for the future of America.
Well, and we'll come on to why you missed in just a second, why you got it wrong. But did anyone cut you any slack for having owned up or not?
I got tremendous positive feedback, not only for having owned up, but for going on my live show, owning up and discussing it. And I got a huge amount of feedback saying, regardless of the outcome of this election, you've inspired me. You've provided a lot of wisdom about American history and American politics. And the Keys still have a good track record and are still a sound basis for understanding American history and understanding American presidential politics, in contrast to all the poll-driven uh, prediction models, a lot of which, were at least slightly tilting towards Harris, but they don't teach you anything. Polls are right or wrong, end of story, see you in 4 more years. Keys still teach a lot. I've had students say, I've inspired them to pursue careers in history and political science. And that warms my heart more than anything else. But I'm still getting, unfortunately, more hate than I've ever seen before. Things that are vulgar, scurrilous, violent, threatening. We have the police on alert. We have the FBI on alert to protect my
Mm.
family.
So really, really nasty stuff that leaves you in fear of your life and your family's life.
Absolutely. It's really sad that it's come to this. All I do is predict elections. Why should
Right.
I be the target of violence?
Well, I mean, that is horrendous, and I'm sorry that that has happened to you. Let's just go back then to why you think you got it wrong. What was not firing on all cylinders for you?
Yes. I've always said I could be wrong. I'm a human being. I'm not psychic Gene Dixon with a crystal ball. I'm not Speaker Mike Johnson who thinks the Almighty speaks to him. My system is based on history, and it's always possible there could be unprecedented events that break the pattern of history. And I do think two things are operating here. One unique to this election, the other which calls into question on the long term, the keys, and more broadly, our democracy. In the short term, I have never before seen, and I've studied our politics since the founding, a political party openly and viciously trashing their sitting president. And you may recall I was deeply critical of that at the time. And I think that had the effect, outside the keys, of tainting any Democratic nominee. If the party is so divided, why should we support it, particularly the vice president? And then I think it may have compromised the contest key. We had another unprecedented situation, a candidate being nominated who, in the primary era since the 1970s, did not go through the primaries. I called it as best I could because, 99% of the delegates united behind Harris, but that unprecedented situation may have implicated that call. More broadly, I think what happened this year was the explosion of a number of trends that have been present in the recent and deep American past that tainted this election. First, disinformation. We've always had disinformation, but we've never had it to the degree we've seen this time, not just from Trump and his allies, but from the billionaires who are backing his candidacy. Elon
Elon
Musk
Musk and people.
controls X, controls Twitter, 2 billion views on his misinformation. We've never seen anything like that. Finally, I think we saw the culmination of three trends that run deeply in American history that exploded here. Xenophobia, nothing new. The first anti-immigrant legislation was 1798. The enemy then was the French and the Germans and the Irish, the Jews, the Mexicans, the Muslims. There's always another, and that exploded this year. And it could be members of your own race, your own ethnicity. And of course, racism is deeply imbued in American history, as is misogyny. So we saw all of these factors exploding to create an entirely unique situation in 2024, which calls into question the basic premise of the keys and the basic premise of our democracy, that
Mm.
voters make informed, rational, pragmatic decisions about whether the White House party has governed well enough to get 4 more years or should be booted out. If elections
But I
are
mean, if
guided by
elections,
disinformation and those other
yeah.
trends, that falls apart.
Well, the electorate is obviously volatile, and that's one thing. But are you worried that this election may not be free and fair because of the amount of disinformation? It does look, on the face of it, that Donald Trump won a stonking victory. No questions about it.
I am deeply worried that elections are free and fair. The billionaires really have taken over. No question. You got someone, I don't know how rich Elon Musk is, but north of 100 billion, maybe 200 billion, can do anything he wants and has no interest whatsoever in a free and fair election, only has an interest in tilting the political system to help his own business interests, his own ego. So with so many billionaires weighing in, and also the whole oil industry, and I'm deeply concerned about the threat to our planet from drill, drill, drill. We're going to have more fossil fuel emissions, more danger. Yes, I am really worried about the future of our democracy because of all these trends I've talked about. And I will be very carefully monitoring what is going to be the developments once the Trump administration takes over. And I
Well,
will, despite all the threats, I will continue to be a voice for democracy.
well, let's talk about the aftermath. Then you fessed up, you did your mea culpa on your live show. Have you spent the succeeding days thinking about whether your method, your keys system, is valid still? Maybe do you need to look at something else? Are pollsters sort of no longer really that useful?
Yeah, and as I said, the polls don't teach you anything. If they're wrong and forget it. Even being wrong on the keys, I've still gotten a tremendous amount of feedback saying the keys are still a very important template to test our democracy, and they still teach us a great deal about our history and our politics. So obviously, I'm not going to make a snap judgment. There's a long way to go to 2028, and I'll be 81
Mm.
at the time.
Well,
So,
it sounds
I
like,
may not even be active predictor, but I will be watching everything that's going on and I will continue to speak out, and the threats will not deter me.
but it does sound to me as if you might be slightly hanging up your boots by the next election. You don't anticipate you'll be using the same method or doing exactly the same thing.
That's to be determined. I've been very open about this. I was wrong. I'm reconsidering. But at this point, 4 years ahead of time, I am making no snap judgments whether I'll be using the same keys, a slightly modified version, or I'll decide that, our democracy has been so compromised that no prediction system is valid.
So it really has. The last few days have made you question your whole raison d'etre, really.
Well, they made me question the fundamental basis by which an electorate decides who the president is going to be, and it's made me question the future of our democracy. Democracy is precious, but like all precious things, it can be destroyed, and it's almost always destroyed from within. The first golden age of democracy wasn't until after World War I, when we had about 24 democracies. That was cut in half or more by the 1940s. Then we had the second golden age in the late 20th century, and it has been one long, slow decline in democracy since then. The threat to democracy is not unique to the United States. It is taking place all over the world. And it's very sad that it has now come to America, the world's longest running democracy. But autocracy is now taking over the world. The vast majority of the world's people do no longer live in functioning democracies.
Well, I'm sure some people listen to you will say, "Well, this is the consequence of disinformation, and it is now skewing our elections. It doesn't need to be Russia interfering with the elections. We're doing it all by ourselves." But there may be others who listen to you and say, "You know what? It's sour grapes. Donald Trump won. Own it."
Donald Trump won, but we do not have close to the implication. Remember, this is a guy who demonizes his opponents as vermin, said he's going to use the military against U.S. citizens, threatened to jail his political opponents. His model is Viktor Orban, the authoritarian in Hungary. He's embraced him. What has Viktor Orban done? Snuffed out his political opposition, snuffed out the free press. He said he'll be dictator on day one to drill, drill, drill. Never mind the threat to the planet, but drilling doesn't take place in a day. It takes place over months and years. And no dictator in the history of the world who's been a dictator on day one has ever voluntarily relinquished power. But what is, I think, most dangerous is these billionaires who now so heavily control American politics and have zero interest in anything but their own interests,
Mm.
not in a free and fair elections. Now, I'm not saying any of this is going to come to pass, but the way dictatorships take hold from within is when people don't take seriously and dismiss what would-be authoritarians have to say and promise. You've got to take this very seriously. It may not come to pass, but we can't just dismiss it.
Professor Lichtman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye-bye.